Paul George is sitting on a 4-year, $212 million contract playing for the Philadelphia 76ers, and on January 31, 2026, the NBA dropped a suspension on him that nobody saw coming. 25 games, no warning, no leaks, no rumors leading up to it. Just an announcement that one of the best players in the league, a 9-time All-Star, was going to be gone for nearly a third of the season because he violated the league's anti-drug policy. That news alone was enough to shake the entire basketball world. But what happened after the suspension came down is what really changed everything. Because Paul George opened his mouth, explained his situation in a way that pointed fingers without directly pointing fingers, and suddenly the conversation was no longer just about him. It became about the whole league. It became about fairness. It became about who gets tested and who does not. And most importantly, it became about LeBron James. That is where things stand right now, and it is a conversation that is not going away anytime soon. So let us go through all of it carefully and talk about what really happened, what it means, and why Paul George's situation has put LeBron in a very uncomfortable position. The suspension nobody saw coming. 4 days before the suspension was announced, Paul George went out against the Portland Trail Blazers and dropped 32 points along with 9 three-pointers. He looked like the Paul George everyone remembered from his best years, smooth, confident, completely locked in. He was moving well, shooting well, and the Sixers looked like they were finally putting things together with him, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey as their core. People were starting to believe in that team again, and then everything collapsed overnight. The NBA came out on January 31st and announced the 25-game suspension without naming the specific substance involved. The league cited privacy rules for not disclosing what George had taken, but people who follow the NBA closely know how the suspension numbers work. A 25-game ban lines up with what the league considers a first-time violation for what they call drugs of abuse. That is the middle category in the NBA's drug policy. It is serious enough to cost you a big chunk of the season, but it is not the same level as a performance-enhancing drug violation, which carries an 80-game suspension. So whatever George took, it landed him in that middle zone, serious but not career-ending. The financial damage was real, though. Based on his $52.8 million salary for the season, the suspension cost George roughly $1.7 million. That's money he is never getting back. And on top of that, the public embarrassment, the questions, the scrutiny, all of it landing on a player who was already dealing with the pressure of living up to the largest contract of his career. George's statement and why it split everyone down the middle. Rather than staying quiet or letting his agent handle everything, Paul George decided to speak directly through ESPN's Shams Charania, and the statement he put out stopped the conversation in its tracks, at least for a moment. He said that he had been discussing the importance of mental health publicly, and that while recently seeking treatment for a personal issue of his own, he made the mistake of taking an improper medication. That one statement did a lot of things at the same time. First, it framed the situation around mental health, which is a topic that has real weight and real sensitivity in sports right now.
Second, it acknowledged wrongdoing, which showed a level of accountability. And third, it connected the violation to a treatment process, suggesting that whatever he took was tied to dealing with something personal rather than trying to cheat his way to better performance. On paper, it reads as an honest explanation, but not everyone saw it that way. Analysts, former players, and fans all had different reactions. Some people believed him completely and felt sympathy for the situation. Others felt like the mental health framing was a strategic choice designed to soften the blow and make the public less critical of what happened. The internet split almost instantly into 2 camps, and the debate about whether his statement was genuine transparency or smart public relations management has not fully settled since. The critics who were most pointed about it said something very direct. They said George should just own it, admit that he made a mistake, accept the punishment, and move on. The argument was that using mental health as the reason, regardless of whether it was true, made it harder to take the accountability seriously. And some former players said flat out that it was not a good look to connect a drug violation to mental health struggles because it blurs the line between seeking real help and making an excuse for something that simply should not have happened. The Sixers actually benefited from all of this. Here's something that most people did not talk about as much as they should have. While Paul George was losing millions and dealing with the public fallout, the Philadelphia 76ers organization actually found themselves in a better financial position because of the suspension. Before the suspension, the Sixers were roughly $7 million over the luxury tax line. When a player is suspended and their salary goes unpaid, that money does not count against the team's cap. So with George sitting out 25 games, the Sixers quietly dropped close to the tax threshold without making any trades, releasing anyone, or doing any of the difficult roster work that usually comes with getting financially flexible. For ownership, that is a quiet win in the middle of what looked like a crisis. And with the February trade deadline approaching, the team suddenly had flexibility they were not expecting to have. Sometimes, in the business of basketball, chaos for one person creates opportunity for the organization around them. That is exactly what happened here. But the real story was always going to be bigger than the dollars, because once George's situation settled into the public consciousness, people stopped talking about the Sixers' finances and started asking much bigger questions about the league as a whole. The Whisper Network and LeBron James. Once the dust from George's suspension started to settle, the conversation shifted in a direction that made a lot of people uncomfortable. The question that started circulating was simple but loaded. If Paul George got caught and suspended for taking an improper medication, who else in this league might be doing similar things? And when people asked that question out loud, the name that kept coming up was LeBron James.
Now, to be completely clear about something important right from the start, LeBron James has never failed a drug test. In more than 20 years in the NBA, across 23 seasons, he has never had a violation, never been suspended, and never been formally accused of anything by the league. His official record is completely clean. That fact matters, and it needs to be stated clearly before anything else is discussed. But the reason his name keeps coming up in these conversations is because of a combination of things that have built up over many years, and George's suspension brought all of it rushing back to the surface at once. The whispers about LeBron and performance-enhancing drugs are not new. They have been floating around in NBA circles, in podcasts, in off-camera conversations for a long time, but they usually stayed at a low volume. They were the kind of thing people said quietly or implied without fully committing to a direct statement. What Paul George's suspension did was turn up the volume on all of those conversations at the same time. Chael Sonnen and the claim that shocked everyone. To understand why the LeBron conversation got as loud as it did, you have to go back to a moment that happened in March 2023. Chael Sonnen, a former UFC fighter and MMA analyst who is very well known for his own history with performance-enhancing drugs. He failed multiple drug tests, including a major case in 2014 involving EPO and human growth hormone that got him a 2-year suspension, was a guest on the Flagrant podcast with Andrew Schultz. And during that conversation, Sonnen dropped a claim that made everyone stop and pay attention. He said that he and LeBron James shared the same supplier. One sentence, that was all it took to freeze the sports world for a moment. Here was a man who had been caught, punished, and who spoke openly about his own use of performance enhancers, now claiming a direct connection to LeBron. And he did not stop there. He explained what EPO does to the body. He talked about how it boosts red blood cells and increases endurance, allowing an athlete to play heavy minutes deep into their late 30s and early 40s without the usual physical decline that comes with age. And he said clearly that in his opinion, that was the reason LeBron was able to do what he did at an age when most players are either retired or playing a fraction of their previous minutes. Sonnen doubled down on the same claim in February 2024 on another major podcast. Same confidence, same story. He said he did not even see it as that big of a deal, and that second time saying it is what really pushed the noise to another level. Kevin Garnett, Tracy McGrady, and Jeff Teague all joined the conversation. Around the same time that Sonnen was making his claims, the conversation was also picking up steam inside basketball circles. Kevin Garnett, one of the most respected players in NBA history and someone who is not known for saying things carelessly, was on his podcast with Paul Pierce in February 2024. They were talking about Bronny James and whether he could score on his dad. It was a lighthearted conversation. Pierce was laughing, but Garnett went quiet for a moment and then said LeBron was on that new juice. He said it casually, like it was just a known thing, and while it could have been dismissed as trash talk, coming from Kevin Garnett in that tone, it did not feel like just a joke to most people who heard it. Then, in April 2025, Tracy McGrady was asked about LeBron's longevity. McGrady is a Hall of Famer who played in the same era as LeBron for a portion of his career. He praised LeBron's work ethic and his discipline. He said all the right things about what LeBron puts into his body maintenance and his recovery. But then he paused and quietly added that he just hoped it was being done the right way. That is not an accusation. McGrady was very careful about how he said it, but that pause and those words planted a seed. And when a respected veteran with real knowledge of the league says something like that, even gently, people remember it. By July 2025, Jeff Teague on his podcast went even further and directly questioned LeBron's body transformation during his Miami Heat years. He pointed to the timing of when HGH testing was introduced into the NBA and noted specific details about how LeBron's physical appearance changed during a period when he was reportedly dealing with a back issue. The clip went viral almost immediately. Then Teague tried to walk it back and said the media twisted his words and that he was joking, but the damage was already done.
And interestingly, Teague revealed that Draymond Green reached out to him privately after the clip spread, warning him to leave LeBron's name alone. Teague even joked that his own father called him, asking if he was trying to get the whole family in trouble. That reaction tells you how sensitive the topic is around certain people in the league. The biogenesis connection, and what the federal document said. The most serious layer of this entire conversation goes back to 2013 and a federal investigation called Operation Strikeout. The DEA launched an investigation into a Florida anti-aging clinic called Biogenesis of America that was accused of supplying performance-enhancing drugs to Major League Baseball players. The scandal ended up catching more than 20 MLB players, including Alex Rodriguez and Ryan Braun, leading to some of the biggest suspensions in baseball history. What is less talked about is that the investigation files went beyond just baseball. When unredacted DEA documents became public, two names connected to LeBron James appeared in those records: his longtime trainer, David Alexander, and his business associate, Randy Mims. According to investigative notes, both were linked to a figure associated with the Biogenesis network. The documents described Alexander allegedly being supplied with substances including peptides and testosterone. The records also described Mims, listed as LeBron's manager, meeting with that same figure to purchase testosterone and metabolism-related injections. Now here is the part that absolutely must be stated clearly, because it matters deeply. The DEA's lead agent on the case stated directly that there was no evidence LeBron James himself committed any wrongdoing. He was never questioned, he was never charged, he was never formally accused. The case involving him was closed with no action taken against him. That is the official record, and that is what the investigation concluded. But here is why the conversation never fully went away. Even though LeBron came out clean, two people who were part of his close inner circle were directly tied to one of the most infamous doping scandals in American sports history. And in the court of public opinion, that kind of proximity keeps questions alive long after the official paperwork is closed. Then, in March 2024, Victor Conte, who was the founder of the Balco lab that was at the center of the baseball steroid era, appeared on a major sports show and said there was reason to be suspicious because of those past biogenesis connections. That comment took what had been background noise and turned it into a full-volume debate overnight. This is really the heart of what Paul George's suspension did to the league's public image. On one side of the conversation, you have George, a 35-year-old, a 9-time All-Star, sitting on one of the biggest contracts in the league, getting hit with a 25-game suspension and losing nearly $1.7 million, all while dealing with the public embarrassment and questions about whether his mental health explanation was genuine. His punishment was real, public, and immediate. On the other side, you have LeBron James, who at 41 years old, in his 23rd NBA season, is still putting up over 22 points a game with 7 assists and strong efficiency numbers, still performing at an elite level at an age when no player in league history has done what he is doing, still on the court, still producing, and officially never having failed a single drug test in his entire career. Gilbert Arenas and Rashad McCants addressed this directly on their show in February 2026, right after George's suspension came down. The conversation started with understanding for George's situation. They acknowledged the pressure of the contract, the injuries he has battled, and the physical toll of being a professional athlete at 35. But the question that kept coming back was about consistency. Arenas pointed out that George had just dropped 32 points 4 days before the suspension. He looked explosive. He looked like a younger version of himself. And when a veteran suddenly turns back the clock like that, right before getting flagged, it draws attention. Someone notices. Someone decides it is time to test more closely. McCants pushed even further and asked the question directly. If the standards are supposed to be equal, why does the scrutiny feel different depending on whose name is attached to it? Why is one player losing a quarter of his season while another player continues to defy the natural aging process without any official?
That question did not go away after the show ended. It spread, and now it is sitting in the middle of every honest conversation about how the NBA handles drug testing and enforcement. LeBron's investment in his body and what people make of it. One of the things LeBron supporters always point to when these conversations come up is his dedication to physical maintenance. And it is real, and it is documented. LeBron reportedly spends over $1.5 million a year on his body. That includes cryotherapy, hyperbaric chambers, advanced recovery technology, private chefs, and some of the best trainers and physical therapists in the world. It is an extraordinary level of investment in staying at peak physical condition. His supporters say that is the blueprint. They say that is exactly why he is still playing at 41, while other players his age have long been retired. They point to it as proof that hard work, discipline, and smart investment in recovery can extend a career beyond what most people think is possible. And that argument deserves to be taken seriously because the commitment is real and the results have been extraordinary. But here is where the critics push back. They point to the NBA's testing system and note that it involves a limited number of random checks per season. Experts in sports science have also discussed how certain substances can leave the bloodstream relatively quickly if the timing is managed carefully. That is not an accusation directed at any specific player. It is a general fact about how some substances work and why some people in the sports world question whether random testing is as comprehensive as the league suggests. That general reality is part of why the debate around LeBron's longevity refuses to go away, even in the absence of any official finding against him. Where everything stands right now. As of February 2026, Paul George is serving out his suspension, and the Sixers are adjusting around him. Kelly Oubre Jr. came back healthy. Tyrese Maxey stepped up. Coach Nick Nurse told the team to stay focused and control what they can control. The franchise is moving forward and trying to keep the season from completely falling apart. But the bigger conversation that George's suspension started is not moving on as quickly as the league probably wants it to. The debate about fairness, equal standards, and who gets tested when is now fully in the mainstream. It is not just happening in the comment sections of basketball blogs or on late-night podcasts anymore. It is being discussed openly by players, analysts, and former professionals who have real credibility and real experience inside the league. LeBron James is in an uncomfortable position right now. Not because he's done anything wrong officially. His record is clean, and that fact has to be respected. but because the combination of Paul George's suspension, the mental health framing that came with it, the years of whispers from Chael Sonnen, Kevin Garnett, Tracy McGrady, Jeff Teague, and others, and the biogenesis documents connecting his close associates to one of the biggest doping investigations in American sports history. All of that is sitting in one place at one time, and it is hard to ignore the weight of all of it being stacked together. The question that everyone keeps coming back to is the one that is the most uncomfortable to ask, but also the most honest. If the NBA truly applies equal standards to every player, regardless of their status, their salary, or their influence on the league's popularity and revenue, then why does the scrutiny feel so dramatically different from player to player? Why does one player lose 25 games and nearly $2 million, while the conversation around another player who has had public connections to performance-enhancing drug investigations through his inner circle continues to be treated as gossip rather than legitimate inquiry? Those questions do not have clean answers right now. They probably won't have clean answers for a long time, but they are being asked loudly and publicly in a way they never were before Paul George's suspension changed the whole conversation. And whether you believe LeBron has done something wrong, or you believe his clean record tells the full story, the reality is that Paul George opened a door that is going to be very difficult for anyone to close again. The debate about fairness, transparency, and equal treatment at the highest level of professional basketball is now front and center, and it is not going